scandalous conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. These preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
Billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious. Choice is an illusion created between those with power and those without.
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
Thank you, John Larson. I receive your kind words on behalf of all of our courageous members of the House of Representatives who want the best for the American people. And what we can do that is best for them in the next 24 hours is to pass affordable, accessible health care for all Americans. The best for all Americans is to have 32 million more people to have health insurance in our country. The best for...
Piece of stinking filth.
Shh, sitting in shop. This is AJ of the InfoWars. Listen to the Shaliak. This is Alex Jones of InfoWars. Listen to Shaliak on the Cold Reality News and Report.
This is the coolest thing I have ever seen.
Well, hello there.
Against him, but the UK authorities still say that if he sets foot outside this embassy, they will arrest him because he, of course, jumped bail when he went into the embassy, and WikiLeaks still fears an onward extradition to the United States. So we're seeing Ecuador making moves, quite concerted moves, to try and resolve the situation, but the UK government still remains intractable on the issue. So even after all this time, it's very unclear when and what will be the ending of this saga.
Yeah, Laura Smith and US officials have refused to comment on the matter too, but there is still speculation that if Assange does step out of that embassy and is arrested, the US may request his extradition for revelations made by WikiLeaks. We asked some people over in Ecuador then if they supported their government's action.
La primera cosa es que el Ecuador vuelva a reafirmar.
It's vital to continue negotiating. The situation is difficult. Being incarcerated for several years is dangerous to health. We all know that the objective behind the trials has nothing to do with Assange or WikiLeaks. There's a real possibility of extradition to the US.
I think Assange was treated inhumanely during the entire trial process. A prisoner without a fixed sentence and with rights to defense being violated.
We got the opinion too of two particular activists on what they thought could happen to Julian Assange now, and they weren't very optimistic either.
Basis on which the UK authorities would arrest him apparently is for breaking bail conditions for the charges in terms of the case in Sweden that have now been dropped. But absolutely, maybe there will be an extradition attempt. And as various kind of international bodies have found when they've looked into it, the chance of Julian Assange getting a free and fair trial in the US are minimal.
I think that this is really a continuation of a very dangerous and wrong-headed policy to target whistleblowers. Julian is one of the biggest of the international whistleblowers, and I think that they really want his head on a platter. It's the worst-kept secret in Washington that Julian is likely slated to begin working his way through the U.S. judicial process if he ever leaves the embassy.
So how does he occupy his time when there? Well, despite being holed up in that embassy for 5 years, we were saying it's may be that he's found a new way to entertain himself. Cryptic tweets seem to be a new favourite pastime.
This naturalization was granted on the 12th of December 2017.
Mr. Assange, I'm no genius, but reading the chessboard, I think I can safely assume the black pieces are the bad guys, and the white pieces, well, let's just say they're the not-so-bad guys, right?
Another interpretation. The game might still be in progress, but Julian Assange is in a strong position against opposing US interests.
Something very different next. This came out in the week. The US Army is seeking to acquire, apparently, software capable of interacting with social media users in other countries. The bots, it says, must be adept at understanding colloquial language and generating responses to people's posts, as well as gauging public sentiment. In the week, Daniil Petrenko talked me through the Pentagon's drive to expand its online operations.
The classic bots have been out there for ages, and we know what they're usually used for. That is sending out spam messages, in some cases performing hacking attacks. But it seems that Uncle Sam is after something much more sophisticated here. If you go online and check out the U.S. Federal Business Opportunities website, you will come across a Pentagon request from earlier this week, and this was something that really caught our attention. What the U.S. Army wants right now is a software system that will be able to translate between languages, most notably Russian, Korean, Farsi, and Arabic. And we all know which countries these languages are spoken in. The tool is meant to understand and know how to use correctly dialects, slang, and even emojis. Plus, it must be a tool that is capable of analysis. All these millions of posts, comments, and replies, and we all that these things can be really dodgy, are to be analyzed for emotion and sentiment.
Key question is, I guess it's probably obvious, but what's it going to be used for, potentially?
They want the software to be able to communicate with users online. Maybe not 100% like a human being, but somewhat close to that. Just take this requirement that I have printed out right here. It is the ability to generate at least 3 or up to 10 unique statements derived from the original social media statement while retaining the meaning and the tone of the original. Again, the software will monitor and analyze its own impact from the messages that it sends, then adjust. Plus, it also needs to be self-taught in a way that it can learn from its own mistakes and then improve and upgrade, which provides potentially unprecedented opportunities for influencing opinion online.
Of course, can't be going without notice. The irony of this big plan is that it's hot on the heels of US leaders complaining about all the potential fuss about online interference from other parties, other countries around the world.
Yes, Kevin. In the case when Russian troll farms and bots, they're all over the media, news about that. Some experts have already told us that it's part of a U.S. campaign, could be, to expand their online influencing capabilities, something that they have been up to for years. But really, the sophistication of this new project, machines being able to analyze the emotions and the sentiment of comments online, that is something alarming.
Yeah, Ilya Petrenko explaining a bit more. Well, we contacted the Pentagon for clarification. They did get back, but as we said, with not much. They said that the tool would be helpful to them given the huge amount of data to handle online. Ends. We discussed the push to develop advanced bots with NSA whistleblower William Binney, who joined us, and also former MI5 agent Annie Machon. They outlined some of the implications as they saw it.
What they really want to do is be able to monitor voice communications or any kind of communications, text, and be able to assess it and check it for threats or things like that, or even from some of the manipulation programs, even respond in kind and try to manipulate the other person at the other end. So, all intelligence agencies have this as one of their objectives. White papers are generally circulated among contractors who do business with the government. So it is a little unusual to see these things out in the public, as far as I know.
The most obvious interpretation would be that this is a pushback against the allegations that have been made consistently for the last 18 months about so-called Russian troll farms influencing elections across the West. And it's interesting to see that the languages that they're advertising for are the language of Iran and, of course, North Korea and Russia. So that would be a bit of a sort of giveaway about which countries they want to be targeting.
It was a week of diplomatic slip-ups for Donald Trump just gone. On Friday, it was reported that he launched into that foul-mouthed rant in the Oval Office about immigrants. He denies it, though. Several Democratic lawmakers who were there say the president, however, was deeply disparaging about people from Central America and also Africa.
He uses implicitly strong language that hurts El Salvador and other countries' dignity. We express our strong protest and energetically reject those types of statements.
Incredible declaration, because those supremacist, racist and fascist expressions, like the ones that Donald Trump used, means our people are worth nothing to him.
These are shocking and shameful comments from the President of the United States. I'm sorry, but there's no other word one can use but racist.
As to be said, Trump took to Twitter pretty quickly to deny that he'd used those actual words, but did admit that the language he did use in that meeting was, as he put it, tough. And there are offences to men in the UK too, after Trump announced Thursday he was cancelling next month's visit to London. He was due to open the new US embassy there, but pulled out, he says, over the cost and location of the new building. But there could be more to it, as Polly Boyker found out.
This is what all the hoo-ha is about. It's the new US embassy in the area of Nine Elms, which is being regenerated into sort of an embassy quarter. It's set to open to the public next week. Donald Trump was supposed to arrive in February, or it was widely expected that he'd be cutting the ribbon then. That's not happening anymore, clearly. The old building of the US embassy was on this sort of grand old square in the very heart of the city, in the centre of Mayfair, which many people know is the most expensive location on the Monopoly board. But the interesting thing about the president's tweets is that there was a slight error. He accused the Obama administration of selling that old building for peanuts. It was, in fact, the Bush administration before him. And there have been suggestions that this whole embassy row is a way of diverting attention away from the fact that perhaps President Trump didn't feel like he was going to be particularly welcome here in the UK. Almost 2 million people here signed a petition against him coming here, claiming, perhaps for the most British reason of all, that it would embarrass the Queen, Donald Trump arriving here. And the Mayor of London hasn't been too welcoming either. Take a listen to what Sadiq Khan has had to say about Donald Trump.
It appears that President Trump got the message from the many Londoners who love and admire America, and Americans but find his policies and action the polar opposite of our city's values. This just reinforces what a mistake it was for Theresa May to rush and extend an invitation of a state visit in the first place.
But hang on, all was not lost. Donald Trump did kind of appear at the embassy. Looks kind of realistic. He's a waxwork, of course. Got a bit of a laugh from construction workers and the odd passer-by. It's from London's Madame Tussauds Museum. Couldn't resist a bit of marketing there. Good plan. Meantime, a local Labour Party official I spoke to in the week says it's clear he thinks why Trump cancelled because he wasn't expecting a warm welcome.
We know that it's because he was going to face, huge protests when he came here. He's a deeply unpopular man this side of the Atlantic, and there were going to be hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million people on the street. This is the kind of pressure that Donald Trump would be facing if he came over here, and he doesn't have the spine to take that. As soon as someone insults him, he's straight on Twitter. I don't think it's going to alienate his support base. There are a lot of angry people out there, and Trump has manipulated that anger into a support base. And he's been wholly disingenuous about it, but he has managed to whip up a lot of discontent about the drawbacks of globalization, how globalization is not working for everyone. There are some left behind people, and those left behind people have flocked around Trump.
Stay with us if you can. Coming up, the bedtime story nobody wants to read, a false alarm about an incoming missile sent people in Hawaii running for cover last night. We'll tell you all about that.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, what would you want to be? You want someone to want to be president. What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 a.m? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows. Question more.
Here's what people have been saying about Redacted tonight. Give it to us. Redacted is full-on awesome. The only show I go out of my way to watch every week. It really packs a punch. Lee Camp is the John Oliver of RT America. They do have the same accent. Hey, we are apparently better than boobs. Nothing's better than boobs. You see, people you've never heard of love Redacted tonight. The president of the World Bank, though, hates it. He doesn't really have any taste. Seriously, he sent us an email.
Well, that's fun and dandy, isn't it? Behind me, the kind of text alert you do not want to get from the government telling you to make a run for it because a missile is incoming. Truth. That's the message received last night by people across Hawaii. On your screens, you can see the panic it caused there. Ireland is literally fleeing for cover. It's not a laughing matter. It took about half an hour for the authorities to scramble to get themselves together to confirm, in fact, it was nothing to worry about and that it was indeed just a false alarm.
What happened today was totally unacceptable, and many in our community was deeply affected by this, and I'm sorry for that pain and confusion that anyone might have experienced.
So what went wrong? Well, authorities said an employee pressed a button by mistake, maybe not working there anymore. Mistakes happen, but we spoke to the international affairs expert, Dr. Sriraj Chuliam, about the incident. He told us that it reflects a lack of confidence in the US government's ability to protect them, maybe.
There is a lot of panic and alarmism that's going around. And the United States, despite being a superpower, has been spooked by Rocket Man. And I think the build-up in the media about the imminent threat of Kim Jong-un has grown into the minds and the consciousness of people. So even if it was a technical error and the wrong button that was pressed, I think it shows how much there is no confidence in the American society about the government's ability to protect its own citizens. Neither Hawaii nor Guam nor any of the other U.S. Pacific territories should have loss of sleep, but they are. And that shows that the scare tactics and the panic has risen so much that people are not willing to rely on their government's security guarantees. And I think it shows also the Trump administration's failure to manage the North Korea crisis in a way that assures the American population of basic security.
That early warning system had been reinstated of late in Hawaii because tensions were growing between the US and North Korea. And the governor there is now calling for steps to be taken to de-escalate the crisis. Meantime, earlier in the week, the two Koreas did hold their first official talks in more than 2 years. Our senior correspondent, Murad Gazdiev, has more on that.
It went well, which is rare to hear these days when it comes to the Koreas. One, North Korea agreed to send a delegation to the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. Sports people, performers for the cultural events. It's simple. If the North attends the Olympics, it's much less likely to stage a provocation, launch another missile. Two, family reunions. Relatives separated by the war that haven't seen each other for decades could be allowed reunions next month. And three, perhaps most importantly, South Korea has proposed face-to-face meetings between the North's and the South's military officials in order to de-escalate tensions at long last, ultimately to denuclearize the peninsula. It's a long shot, but it's a start.
I think we should be engaged in these talks in an earnest, sincere manner to give a New Year's gift, namely the results of the talks, to the Korean nation.
As you mentioned earlier, we hope to bring a precious gift to your people that matches the expectations of our people.
It has been a chaotic year. From escalation to escalation, saber-rattling and childish rhetoric. Near enough every month, the US and South Korea would stage war games on the North's borders that send a message. They even sent nuclear bombers to the North's borders. North Korea was no less provocative. It tested increasingly advanced ballistic missiles, staged suspected nuclear weapons tests, and it now reportedly has the capacity to hit mainland United States. And Kim Jong-un has boasted he has his own button on his desk as part of whose button is bigger contest with Trump. Which is why these talks were so important. They allow for a pause, for hot heads to cool off, and for tightened fingers to ease off on the triggers.
Up next, these pictures just coming in. We'll share them with you. Dramatic video from northern Italy where a roof of a 5-story building collapsed after it was damaged by a gas explosion. Let's check this out. I've seen it for the first time myself. Well, that incident took place earlier on today, north of Milan. Pictures are just in, but, well, he wouldn't be living there. That was an apartment of a 73-year-old man. What's left of it, the roof collapsed. Hours after the explosion, had already inflicted heavy damage on that building. Luckily, despite all the mess, only minor injuries reported. The exact cause of that gas leak still being investigated. Can't be too careful with gas, of course. Now, back to stories from the week. One of Britain's leading girls' schools has decided to stop referring to its pupils as girls in a controversial move to adopt more gender-neutral language. Altrincham Grammar School for Girls defended the policy, saying it's simply trying to break ingrained habits to help students with gender identity issues, adding that, quote, we welcome and celebrate diversity. Some people, though, have already come up with an alternative name for that school, then.
This week on Cold Reality Radio. More on the stories that you heard just at the beginning of the program here from RT America. Won't happen again. The Hawaii officials apologize, blame missile warning fiasco on human error. Federal documents reveal Stephen Paddock had likely accomplices and seven different cell phones. That's the Las Vegas shooter. Vegas gunman's girlfriend told investigators her fingerprints would probably be on ammo, and they were. U.S. again supports Al-Qaeda in Syria. Trump and his shithole remark, the story nobody is talking about. Army strategist exposes the disturbing parallels between U.S. domestic policy and military tactics abroad. Jersey City police officer accused of running suspect over twice. The Fed paid $29.3 billion to banks not to lend in 2017, gave $80 billion to the Treasury. Fourth hacker caught by the FBI for hacking Hollywood celebrities and leaking nude photos. Cops taser and tear gas man simultaneously, causing him to burst into flames. Whistleblower Grigory Rodchenkov will testify about Russian doping at the Olympics, but his life is under serious threat. Again, new unsealed FBI documents report the Vegas shooter's girlfriend said she handled ammunition. Russian DNC hackers are targeting the U.S. Senate, cyber firm says. New study reveals mushrooms cure depression by doing the exact opposite of what antidepressants do. That and more on today's edition of Cold Reality Radio here on the UCY.TV Broadcasting Network. It is 10:27 on the East Coast of Night America. And what you've heard this morning is, it should be no surprise that, we're moving in the direction of, you can only imagine what took place in Germany and other areas of the world. Not only when Hitler was demonized and when Hussein was demonized and when Gaddafi was demonized and killed, and of course all these other Hitlerian type leaders or misleaders or whatever you want to see, whatever you want to believe from the American, the Western media, which has just been a bunch of hogwash bullshit since the beginning, going all the way back to Walter Cronkite. Just absolute fucking lies and garbage and propaganda to make those living and growing and paying taxes in this country, to make them believe that America is this source of good and greatness and democracy around the world, when it is absolutely nothing of the sort. And of course that will, those who are brainwashed will will get all uppity and act very dickish when you say things like this, because they don't know anything else. They've been lied to, like they were lied to about fucking Santa Claus when they were a young idiot or idiots growing up in a propagandized fake utopia. America was never a utopia. It's been a what they call a pirate cove. This is well documented by many, many historians that you don't hear about on the mainstream media because they don't want you to know what America was, what it is, how it transitioned into being the absolute thug police state around the world. It pains me to say that because, my father fought in World War II, was very badly injured, was crippled up for most of his life after that, was able to walk, was able to do certain things, walk and work. But overall, his ability, his motion was quite limited, and he did live to be 84 before the created cancer that has affected so many people, the injected hijacking of the human immune system by this American Medical Association, which Patrick Jordan writes about in detail in ICD 999, Vaccine-Induced Diseases, the Chronic Serum Sickness Postulate, among other books that Patrick has put into the ether for those to learn about the militarized attack, not only abroad but domestically. And there's a lot of people that just can't fathom, they can't stomach that would take place. And I call them the thumbsuckers. It's a thumbsucker nation. There are some out there, and and people that I've come across, not only in the workplace, but there's a small percentage of people that have this ability to be able to see through the bullshit, to be able to think for themselves, to be able to derive from and decipher the propaganda and the absolute bullshit that the American system is. You could say that we've been lucky to have been born here. Not my choice, not anyone's choice, but here we are. Other countries have been somewhat decimated. Europe was decimated by these banking bloodline families that dominate over everything and have also funded the disease creation, funded the hijacking of the human immune system of man, of woman, and then they make money off of what they've done. They make money off of the destruction of genome, the destruction of genes, the turning on and off of genes that should not be turned on, and the turning off of genes that should not be turned off. Thus, we have the disease that we see today, from muscular dystrophy to multiple sclerosis to cancer to heart disease to many, many new diseases that are becoming very prominent. Lyme disease, much more devastating and widespread than we have been told. But if you reach out and you try to figure out what's really going on, there's no reason whatsoever that there should be this much chaos, that there should be. But the thing is that we've been so strategically and so maliciously, but marvelously socially engineered that we accept all of this as we accept disease. My sister right now is not doing very well, and she's been suffering from a digestive issue, loss of weight, things like that over the last, I want to say over the last 20 years. And she's not doing very well. And we can only, from what I speak to Patrick Jordan about, I mentioned that 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago when I had Patrick on, I, let him know that, my sister's dealing with this thing, this SIBO, this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And, it's just over time has really somewhat wrecked her and her quality of life. And my fear is that it's going to take her life. Hold on 1 second. As you can hear, I'm not well myself. Hold on. You're listening to the Call Reality Radio here on UCY.tv, Sunday, January 14th, 2018. It is 10:36 on the East Coast of America, and I'm going to take a quick 10 to 15 second break to blow my nose. Well, that felt wonderful. All right. So the amount of dysfunction that we see from the shootings that we see, where there's more and more information that is coming out. So you can't hide information. You can only control how information gets out to the commoners. And that's what CBS, Columbia Broadcasting, ABC, NBC, Fox, NPR, you have to be able to control the narrative. You have to be able to tell the story, earn the trust, which is not that hard to do when you're dealing with fucking idiots, when you're dealing with people that have been not only chemically castrated, but mentally mutilated to the point where they will believe anything. And of course, you have to give those animals, that's what they consider tell us that we are on so many different levels. You have to feed those animals and you have to entertain them. And so there's just been this incredible equation that has been proliferated out for years and years and years. And then they allow you this and allow you that. Meanwhile, they have their control systems in place, their courts or their churches, because their goal is to replace God, to replace natural law with unnatural law and man-made satanic Luciferian laws. But over time, if it's done the right way, the propaganda, which is incredibly generated, and the amount of money, because they control money, they control the flow of information, they control how we think about things. All you see on TV. I remember back in the mid 1980s when there was a movie called Nighthawks, and it was how the system was getting everyone prepared for the T word. It was getting them prepared for terrorism, blowing up things, killing people, things like that. And that's what Nighthawks was about. If you just go to YouTube and you just kind of type in Nighthawks, Sylvester Stallone, Rutger Hauer. Now, Rutger Hauer was the terrorist, and his name was Wolfgang. And of course, Sylvester Stallone, in and about his Rocky persona, started getting into some of the action stuff, and of course, that's again when roughly around that time when we started getting inundated with the terrorism, and they show him moving about in the city, New York, probably, whatever, Chicago, maybe, I don't remember, but he goes in and he places a device into a shopping mall or a department store, and then blows that as he leaves. Then it blows up, and then then you start seeing the whole build up. Like, this was somebody set this off. Who did this? Who did that? And basically today, when you see these types of things, you know that these aren't organic. There's people out there that just don't go. And wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to blow people up. They just don't do that. But the system will have you believe that people are just, they just wake up and it's because of religious reasons or because of course, fanatical religious reasons. There's nothing more fanatical and crazy than Catholicism, Judaism, and the Islam that can there's different levels. There's peaceful people in all walks of life, but the system sells us this group is bad group of people. Now, I'm not condoning anything, and I'm not what I'm saying is, it's just like anything else. You're growing up. If your parents, if you're a white family, and you've had bad scenarios and history of whatever, not getting along with other Asian people or African American people, okay, that gets taught in the house. Hatred gets taught in the house. You can tell just by looking at people, walking around people, seeing how they look at you. You can tell that they've been. You can almost feel the hatred, and that's what we're seeing more and more now with the election of Donald J. Trump. He is being demonized all over, as you heard in the beginning in RT America. Whether he said this or not, okay, it's possible that he's still being sabotaged from the inside. I'm not a fan of him. I could care less. I could care less if he gets fucking impeached. I could care less but the bottom line here is that, and I watched a really, really good speech the other day. It was like 90% or 80%, like completely thumbs up with it. And then, of course, the other 20% thumbs down. Listening to Chris Hedges talk about the myth of human progress and the collapse of societies. And he always, for reasons of propaganda and the lies of, we go back to the lies of, I'm not saying he's lying, but he really, really believes that global warming and climate change are going to devastate our world, whatever this is we're on. Again, I'm not spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. If you think you are, you probably should fucking think again. So he's on there and he's saying a lot of really, really good and powerful things. But there's also this climate that his idea of the corporate state, which he doesn't truly realize that the United States of America is a corporation that controls all of the other corporations, all the other sub-corporations, all the other the estates are all sub-corporations of the United States. And as we move forward, he believes that what we're doing here, he believes a lot of these other scientists as well, because these scientists are wrapped into this system. If you're a scientist or you're a climatologist or whatever, chances are you are involved in one of these corporations. You're involved in one of these universities, these organizations of lower learning, of the dumbing down of man and woman. You're not being taught anything of importance. and Hedges beautifully presents a lot of this stuff, but at the same time, there's always a link to this climate change. There's always a link to it, and he can never ever let go of it. And of course, it's very hard to believe that people would lie to that level. We have wars where millions of people and children have been absolutely killed, murdered, poisoned for years to come in Iraq with depleted uranium and things of that nature. He knows that we've got no business doing any of these things that we do. But he's still part of the system. And he will move forward and speak very powerfully on a lot of these topics. And let's see if I can post it in the chat before the end of the program. Excuse me, folks. I'm all, my sinuses are all wrecked, man. Give me 10 seconds. And I think one of the most powerful things that he said was the myth of human progress. That the corporate masters push, that the CEOs of the United States of America Corporation, Trump now, Obama, bloodline members of the George Washington bloodline, all these bullshit stories about the American Revolution and all this shit. America was stolen. Land was stolen by these people. And anybody who stood in their way would face it. You know, how you're Washington being first cousins with the king at the time, fighting for independence from his first fucking cousin. you gotta get your fucking heads out of your fucking backsides, man. This is a blueprint. America is not home of the free and land of the brave. Okay? Home of the free. Land of the free, home of the brave, whatever. They'll change it at some point because some fucking sissy friggin' prude out there will be like, I don't like that. Let's take down all these statues. I don't give a fuck about the statues. I don't give a fuck about American history. When you find out that it's all lies and it's all bullshit. All these fantastical stories that are told to make you think that you're part of something incredible. When it was just a way to steal fucking land. Just a way to steal land and make it look like, there wasn't a monopoly. The money of the Rothschild family, the British Empire. Just like when IBM created Microsoft, when they were being questioned about their monopolizing. So they create another company, Microsoft, which dominates the world today, other than Apple. And makes us believe, or they don't even make us believe that it's separate. They're all tied together, like I believe Google and Microsoft and all of these, and Cisco and all of these other major companies that have their name on the networking of the internet, information. They're all the same. They're all the same unit. And then you heard in the beginning where the Pentagon is asking for software that's going to be able to manipulate posts, manipulate thoughts. So the myth of human progress. Whatever progress is being made, and this is point blank because I work with Microsoft software. They break their own shit just to keep themselves relevant. Security holes are built into microprocessors so that information can be stolen. Free speech is subverted if it's said to be hate speech. There is not hate speech, there is only speech. But just like everything else that's been labeled, just like everything else that's been turned into something that it's not, like you at birth, natural law has been hijacked by this or those who believe they have the right to rule over everything. Law. Legalities, all of this stuff. Jeff Sessions is an absolute, just a thug. He's a white thug, and Obama's, attorney. The guy who looked like a fucking sloth. Who didn't like Sessions or any other attorney, number one attorney in any presidential administration. Nobody goes to jail. No bankers go to jail. See, and Hedges sees this. He understands that these people are dragging us through their creation and, of course, their interpretation of all of this. They are a family. They are this is their creation, like Clint Richardson has pointed out so many times. This is a creation. When you are turned into livestock at birth through the abandonment or delivery, and I heard something very, very interesting just last night about Rose McGowan. This is really, really interesting, where she said that she was not, there's no record of her birth. Okay? Rose McGowan, she, lovely woman, she was in some movies. She was on that show Charmed about the three benevolent witches who were fighting evil every fucking episode. Which you tune in here and there. What's this shit? What's this garbage that they're putting out there for young women to watch, and obviously young men to watch the beautiful young witches, the witches. She says there's no record of her birth. And then she's never seen a social security card. So how the fuck does she work in Hollywood? How do they tax her if she doesn't have a social security card? That's your open air concentration camp card right there. Because without that, you might as well be dead in their system. And other people have had that status where they don't have a social security number, or they're considered to be deceased by the system. And then they have to go and prove that they're not. And then, of course, whatever their social security number was before. Dead people still receiving social security checks, and live people not getting checks or whatever. But this is how monetarily how the system is going to collapse, because of all of these. They'll be said to be oversights, and they'll be said to be things that this large bureaucracy just kind of slipped through the cracks. But no, all of these things that happen are happening for a reason, and it's going to be and lead to ultimately the collapse of the Western economy, and of course the world economy, because no matter what you see here with Trump and the numbers that Dow and everything and all these high numbers, it's all an illusion, and it's going to lead to the collapse of the economy, or their economy. And thus your life, your savings, your 401k, it's just all going to wipe out. At some point, it's going to take on some form of collapse. There will be what they call a haircut. And then there'll be a run on the banks. And the banks can't, it's just like Clint says, we believe in the system. So we give it our belief in it, or our love for the system, we give our consent to the system so it continues to work. The system is what it is because we believe it. I go back to that stupid fucking holiday movie with Will Ferrell where he's Elf, and at the end, Santa's sleigh crashes in Central Park, and the only way that they could get that friggin' sleigh off the ground, that fat fucking pedophile Santa, okay, who was Ed Asner, and he's a 9/11 truther, so God only knows how he's still getting movie roles with his belief, as well as many others, with devastating evidence that it was a lie. 3,000 people died. That's the truth. Everything else, fucking lie. So that sleigh can't get off the ground unless people believe in Santa Claus. Or people, so they sit there and they start singing that wretched fucking song. You better not cry, you better not I'm telling you why, Santa Claus. And then, of course, along with the nuclear device that fell off the sleigh, that Buddy the Elf secured with his magic wrench. Eventually, his sleigh was, airborne, and then he was going to deliver, stuff up on cookies and milk. So our belief in the system has it continue. Our belief in the electoral system, us voting. That's why they get all of these rock the vote. They get all these celebrities and everything on there because the system could not operate the way making you believe that you had something to do with it. It cannot function. It would be tyranny. It would be in your face tyranny. Whereas right now it's just, government's fucked up. And, we got these wars and stuff, but as long as I got my programming and my job down at the mini mart, things are good. So our belief in the system, the fact that we go out there and vote, not this guy right here. Yeah, that's it. That's over with. And fuck anybody who says that it's your right to do it. These fucking brainwashed artards that still believe that these elections are above board or whatever they are. The bottom line is that people said, we're not going to vote. We're just not going to vote for you. We're not going to vote for any of you. We're going to vote for, like Clint did, I forget what it was. He made a video of him as this. It was like no vote for. I forget what it was, but none of the above. Vote for none of the above. And then, of course, brilliantly explained the entire electoral system and how our votes really don't even count to a great extent. 10 seconds. Our belief in the system, our belief in George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, the white separatist that he was, and how he never, ever, his goal was not even to free a slave. It was about the Union. It was about the railroad. It was about taxing the fuck out of everybody. Abraham Lincoln, the story of him today, is a bunch of bullshit. But, of course, he's a vampire hunter, too, thanks to Hollywood. That's another, notch on his, or a super awesome entry on his resume. But just a lie. But what we have monuments to, and there's monuments, chances are they were a fucking bastard, and they did exactly what they needed to do at the time for their masters, for the money men, for the Rothschild family, for whoever it was who had the most money and interest. And the interest was capturing and dominating land in the New World, the United States, the Pirate Cove. So we move forward. The same families are in line, the same people. Like Clint points out that Mitt Romney is like a split image of Pierce, President Pierce. These people are all related. George, what's his face? John McCain, related to George Washington. He's related to Barack Obama. He's related to the Bush family. Barbara Bush, she's a Pierce. It's all one big family, just like Hollywood with Tom Hanks and what's his face, Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt. All these people are related. They're all related. That's why they are Hollywood actors and actresses, because they are part of the bloodline families. My nose my sinuses are a wreck. I apologize for the, I don't know, maybe it makes my voice sound better. I don't know. Not a big deal. So again, we sit around and we watch all this news, all this propaganda, Uranium One scandal, indictment unsealed, Clinton's involved in that, Washington involved in that. And I'm under no radical belief that, Russia today, RT America is not without its propaganda. And it very well could be, and I point this out all the time, that everything that's happening is pre-planned, and that there is going to be a war, a hot war, a World War III that will most likely include Russia and Syria and Iran and China. And of course, Trump going back on all of the things that he said that he was going to fight against, said that Saudi Arabia was complicit in the 9/11 attacks, and then he goes over there and gives them incredible sums of money so that they can bomb the poorest country in the Middle East, Yemen, into the Stone Ages, which created a cholera epidemic, and many, many children, many, many young children and families are suffering because of the United States corporation and their complicity with the Saudi Arabian regime, who has horrific human rights violations tied to them. America's full of shit. It's all a lie. They have the approved dictators and the non-approved dictators. You got North Korea and South Korea now sitting down and speaking about the prospect of peace. Family members who have been separated for years within 100 miles, 200 miles, if, separated by the line that the American and the global banking mafia basically created. All strategic, all done. To dominate and dehumanize poison and pillage mankind. And all those awful things that are going on all over the world, they're coming here. They're already happening, but it's going to become obvious. It's going to become a thing. Is that a thing? Yeah, it's going to be a thing. Let's see if I can find a few of those things that Chris Hedges spoke about. What was that? Myth of human progress. Here's some of it.
You are watching original video by truthdig.com. For more information and research,
made this possible.
Let me try this one. It's a different angle. In the videos.
Visit us on the web at www.truthdig.com.
The financial system again implodes.
Here it is.
But when a man suspects any wrong, it sometimes happens that if he be...
Let's listen to some of the video.
Thank you, Bob, Wade,
And I have to disregard
all the other people who made this
the global warming fear mongering.
Perhaps the most prescient portrait of the American character and our ultimate fate as a species is found in Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Melville, in his novel, makes our murderous obsessions, blinding hubris, violent impulses, moral cowardice, and lust for self-destruction visible in the chronicle of a doomed whaling voyage. He is our foremost oracle, what William Shakespeare was to Elizabethan England, or Fyodor Dostoevsky to Tsarist Russia. In Moby Dick, our country is given shape in the form of the ship, the Pequod, named after the Pequod Indian tribe exterminated in 1638 by the Puritans and their Native American allies. The ship's 30-man crew, there were 30 states in the Union when Melville wrote the novel, is a mixture of races and creeds. The object of the hunt is a massive
white whale, Moby Dick, which, in a previous encounter, maimed the ship's captain, Ahab, by dismembering one of his legs. The maniacal quest, much like that of a civilization dependent on fossil fuel and the profits of global speculators, assures the Pequod's destruction. And those on the ship, on some level, know they are doomed, just as many of us know that our civilization and ecosystem cannot stand the continued assault by corporate capitalism. But when a man...
I wish he would address, geoengineering as well. But right there where the capitalism and anyway, just listen.
Man suspects any wrong, it sometimes happens that if he be already involved in the matter, he insensibly strives to cover up his suspicions even from himself, Ishmael says in Moby Dick. And much this way it was with me. I said nothing and tried to think nothing. How much longer can a financial system that depends on the Federal Reserve to purchase $85 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds, much of it worthless subprime mortgages, each month, survive? How much more money, we are now at 15 to 20 trillion, can be looted from the U.S. Treasury by big banks and Wall Street firms before the financial system again implodes? How much longer can wages be driven down and suppressed while interest rates, which can soar to 30%, cripple us with debt peonage? The ecosystem is, at the same time, swiftly disintegrating. Scientists from the International Program on the State of the Ocean a few days ago issued a new report that warned that the oceans are changing faster than anticipated and increasingly becoming inhospitable to life. The excess CO2 and heat from the atmosphere is rapidly warming and acidifying the seas. And this has compounded, the report noted, by increased levels of deoxygenation from nutrient runoffs from farming and climate change. The scientists call these effects a deadly trio that, when combined,
who are these scientists?
Are creating changes in the seas that are unprecedented in the planet's history. This is their language, not mine. The scientists wrote that each of the Earth's 5 known mass extinctions was preceded by at least one of these deadly trios: acidification, warming, and deoxygenation. They warned that the next mass extinction of sea life is already underway, the first such mass extinction in 55 million years.
Something else is causing that.
The University of Hawaii also released a new report saying the effects of climate change are now inevitable. It cannot be stopped. At best, the rate of devastation can be slowed. The report predicted that over the next 50 years, temperature levels will rise to such a rate that human life in many parts of the planet will become unsustainable.
Meanwhile, it's 15 degrees outside.
Millions upon millions of people will flee as refugees. Millions of species will face extinction. Coastal cities, including New York and London, will become unlivable. Microbes seem set to inherit the earth.
They were here before us.
Yet we, like Ahab and his crew, do not change course. We do not trust our eyes or intelligence. We trust in the myth of human progress, the absurd belief that human technology and ingenuity will save us, that somehow, although no one seems to be able to spell out how, we will be able to adapt. This myth is abetted by the corporate assault on culture, journalism, education, the arts, and critical thinking. Those who speak truth are marginalized and ignored, dismissed as pessimists in a culture that prides itself on a childlike optimism at the expense of reality.
Thus the thumbsucker nation that I've labeled it. You know, when I listen to Hedges, he really is somebody who almost gets it. He almost fully understands. He'll say there's a corporate attack on all of this stuff. Well, Is there not also a corporate attack on science and how science has been rewritten and has been mutated? More than enough evidence shows those original 2,000 scientists associated with the UN, one of the most corrupt, vile, insidious, filth organizations ever. Why should we even believe them? Why should we believe anything they fucking say? And of course now with Nikki Haley there, as she gets up off her knees from pleasuring her Zio masters to get the world community to attack and go after Iran. We should not believe anything that the UN has to say about anything, especially climate.
We have a mania for hope, which our corporate masters lavishly provide across the political and cultural spectrum to keep us passive. Friedrich Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, wrote that only a few people have the fortitude to look into what he calls the molten pit of human reality. A handful of artists and philosophers, for Nietzsche, are consumed by an insatiable curiosity, a quest for truth, a desire for meaning, and this sends them down into the bowels of the pit. They get as close as they can before the flames and heat drive them back. This understanding, Nietzsche wrote, comes at a high cost. Those singed by the fire become burnt children, eternal orphans in empires of illusion. Dying civilizations make war on independent intellectual inquiry, art, and culture, and on their burnt children.
And science.
The masters of the corporate state do not want us to peer into the pit or heed the cries of those who have seen what awaits us. The corporate state, rather, feeds the thirst for illusion, happiness, and hope. It peddles the fantasy of endless material progress. It insists, and this is the argument of globalization, that our voyage is unalterable, decreed by natural law. It is part of the march of human progress, and those who challenge this myth are heretics. Clive Hamilton, in his book Requiem for a Species, Why We Resist the Truth About Climate Change, describes a kind of dark relief that comes from accepting that catastrophic climate change is virtually certain. This obliteration of false hopes, he says, requires an intellectual knowledge, but also an emotional knowledge. The first is attainable. The second, because it means that those we love, including our children, will face insecurity, misery, and suffering within a few decades, if not a few years, is much harder to acquire. To emotionally accept impending disaster, to attain the gut-level understanding that the power elite will not respond rationally to collapse, is as difficult to accept as our own mortality. The most daunting existential struggle of our time is to ingest this awful truth, intellectually and emotionally, and yet rise up to resist the corporate forces that are destroying us. The human species, led by white Europeans and Euro-Americans, has been on a 500-year-long planet-wide rampage of conquering, plundering, looting, exploiting, and polluting the earth, as well as killing the indigenous communities that stood in their way.
Over the target now.
The game is up. The technical and scientific forces that created a life of unparalleled luxury, as well as unrivaled military and economic power for a small global elite, are the forces that now doom us. The capitalist quest for ceaseless expansion has become a curse, a death sentence. But even as our economic and environmental systems unravel, after the hottest year in the contiguous 48 states since record-keeping began 107 years ago. We lack the vision and the courage to shut down the engines of global capitalism. Complex civilizations, as many anthropologists have observed, have a habit of ultimately destroying themselves. Joseph Tainter, in The Collapse of Complex Societies, Charles Redman, in Human Impact on Ancient Environments, and Ronald Wright, in A Short History of Progress, have all laid out the familiar patterns that lead to systems breakdown. The difference is that when we go down, the planet will go with us. There will, with this final collapse, be no new lands to exploit, no new civilizations to conquer, no new peoples to subjugate, and no new resources to plunder. Collapse occurs in complex societies not long after they reach their period of greatest power and prosperity. One of the most pathetic aspects of human history is that every civilization expresses itself most pretentiously, compounds its partial and universal values most convincingly, and claims immortality for its finite existence at the very moment when the decay which leads to death has already begun, Reinhold Niebuhr wrote. The ancient Maya, the Sumerians of what is now southern Iraq, ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, even Easter Island, were destroyed by the mechanisms that once made them prosper. The novel ways these civilizations found to exploit the environment, such as the invention of irrigation systems, eventually created disastrous, unforeseen complications. Ronald Wright, in A Short History of Progress, calls this the progress trap. The Industrial Revolution created technological civilizations of such complexity and such dependence on ceaseless exploitation, Wright notes, that we do not know how to make do with less or to reduce our demands on nature. We know only how to service and maintain a system that is killing us. This is the evolutionary history of the human race. As the collapse becomes increasingly palatable, if human history is any guide, we, like past societies, in distress, will see many retreat into what anthropologists call crisis cults. The powerless, felt in the face of ecological and economic chaos, will unleash further collective delusions, a belief, for example, that God or gods or Jesus will come back to earth and save us. The Christian right embodies the escapism of crisis cults. These cults perform absurd rituals to make it all go away, and believers are entranced by magical thinking. Our bankers, corporate boards, politicians, television personalities, and generals hold up seductive images of unrivaled wealth and power. Like Ahab and his crew, these images spur us towards self-annihilation. All my means are sane, Ahab says, my motive and my object mad. Melville, who had been a sailor on clipper ships and whalers, was aware that the wealth of industrialized societies was violently seized from the poor of the earth. All the authorities on his ship are white men: Ahab, Starbuck, Flask, and Stubb. The hard, dirty work, from harpooning to gutting the carcasses of the whales, is the task of the poor, mostly men of color. Melville saw how European plundering of indigenous cultures from the 16th to the 19th centuries, coupled with the use of African slaves as a workforce to replace the natives who died, enriched Europe and the United States. The Spanish conquest of the Americas set in motion 5 centuries of reckless economic and environmental plunder. Karl Marx and Adam Smith attributed the huge influx of wealth from the Americas as having made possible the Industrial Revolution and modern capitalism. The Industrial Revolution equipped technologically advanced states with refined weapon systems, turning us into the most efficient killers on the planet. Ahab, when he first appears on the quarterdeck after being in his cabin for the first few days of the voyage, holds up a doubloon, an extravagant gold coin, and promises it to the crew members who first spot the white whale. He knows that the permanent constitutional condition of the manufactured man is sordidness, and he plays to this sordidness. The whale becomes, like everything in the capitalist world, a commodity, a source of personal profit, a murderous greed, one that Starbuck denounces as blasphemous, immediately grips the crew. Ahab's obsession infects the ship. Ahab conducts a dark mass, a Eucharist of violence and blood on the deck. He orders the crew to circle around him. He makes them drink from a flagon that is passed from man to man, filled with draughts hot as Satan's hoof. Ahab tells the harpooners to cross their lances before him. The captain grasps the harpoons and anoints the ship's harpooners, Queequeg, Tashtego, and Dago, his 3 pagan kinsmen. He orders them to detach the iron sections of their harpoons and fill the sockets with the fiery waters from the pewter. Drink, ye harpooners, drink and swear, ye men that man the deathful whale boat's bow. Death to Moby Dick. God hunt us all if we do not hunt Moby Dick to his death. And with the crew bonded to him in his eternal quest, he knows that Starbuck is helpless amid the general hurricane. Starbuck now is mine, Ahab says, cannot oppose me now without rebellion. The honest eye of Starbuck, Melville wrote, fell downward. The ship, described by Melville as a hearse, was painted black. It was adorned with the gruesome trophies of the hunt, festooned with the huge teeth and bones of sperm whales. It was, Melville wrote, a cannibal of a craft, tricking herself forth in the chaste bones of her enemies. The fires used to melt the whale blubber at night turned the Pequod into a red hell. And we now live on our own hearse, our own raging fires, leaping up from our oil refineries and the explosions of our ordnance across the Middle East, to speak our own lust for blood and profit. And in our mad pursuit, we ignore the suffering of those who impede our hunt, just as Ahab does when he refuses to help the captain of a passing ship who is frantically searching for his son who has fallen overboard. Ahab, however, is not solely reliant on the heated rhetoric of persuasion. He oversees a terrifying internal security force on the ship, the 5 dusky phantoms that seemed fresh formed out of air. Ahab's secret private whaleboat crew, his private mercenaries, keeps the rest of the ship in abject submission. The art of propaganda and the use of brutal coercion and fear are the familiar tools of tyranny. And our lives are as circumscribed as the lives of the crew on the Pequod. The novel, in essence, is the chronicle of the last days of a civilization. And yet, Ahab is no simple tyrant. Melville, at the end of the novel, gives us 2 glimpses into the internal battle between Ahab's maniacal hubris and his anemic humanity. Ahab, too, has a yearning for love. He harbors regrets over his deformed life. The black cabin boy, Pip, is the only crew member who evokes any tenderness in the captain. And Ahab is aware of this tenderness. He fears its power. Pip functions as the fool did in Shakespeare's King Lear. Ahab warns Pip of Ahab. Lad, lad, says Ahab, I tell thee, thou must not follow Ahab now. The hour is coming when Ahab would not scare thee from him, it would not have thee by him. A few pages later, untottering Ahab stood forth in the clearness of the morn, lifting his splintered helmet of a brow to the fair girl's forehead of heaven. From beneath his slouched hat, Ahab dropped a tear into the sea, nor did all the Pacific contain such wealth as that one wee drop. Starbuck approaches him. Ahab, for the only time in the novel, is vulnerable. He speaks to Starbuck of his 40 years on the pitiless sea, the desolation of solitude it has been. Why this strife of chase? Why weary and palsy the arm at the oar and the iron and the lance? How the richer or better is Ahab now? He thinks of his young wife. I widowed that poor girl when I married her, Starbuck, and of his little boy. About this time, yes, it is his noon nap now. The boy vivaciously wakes, sits up in bed, and his mother tells him of me, of cannibal old me, how I am abroad upon the deep, but will come back to dance with him again. Ahab's thirst for dominance, vengeance, and destruction, however, overpowers these faint regrets of lost love and thwarted compassion. Hatred wins. What is it? Ahab finally asks. What nameless, inscrutable, unearthly thing is it? What cozening, hidden lord and master, and cruel, remorseless emperor commands me, that against all natural lovings and longings, I so keep pushing and crowding and jamming myself on all the time? Melville knew that physical courage and moral courage are distinct. One can be brave on a whaling ship or on a battlefield, yet a coward before human evil. And Starbuck elucidates this division. The first mate is tormented by his complicity in what he foresees as Ahab's impious end. Starbuck, Melville writes, while generally abiding firm in the conflict with seas or winds or whales or any of the ordinary irrational horrors of the world, yet cannot withstand those more terrific because spiritual terrors which sometimes menace you from the conquering brow of an enraged and mighty man. Mutiny was the only salvation for the Pequod's crew, and it is our only salvation. But moral courage But moral cowardice turns us into hostages. I am reading and rereading the debates among some of the great radical thinkers of the 19th and 20th centuries about the successful mechanisms of social change. These debates were not academic. They were frantic searches for the triggers of revolt. Lenin placed his faith in a violent uprising, a professional, disciplined, revolutionary vanguard, freed from moral constraints, and like Marx, in the inevitable emergence of the workers' state. Proudhon insisted that gradual change would be accomplished as enlightened workers took over production and educated and converted the rest of the proletariat. Bakunin predicted the catastrophic breakdown of the capitalist order, something we are likely to witness in our lifetime, and new autonomous worker federations rising up out of the chaos. Kropotkin, like Proudhon, believed in an evolutionary process that would hammer out the new society. Emma Goldman, along with Kropotkin, came to be very wary of both the efficacy of violence and even the revolutionary potential of the masses. The revolutionists of history counted on a mobilized base of enlightened industrial workers. The building blocks of revolt, they believed, relied on the tool of the general strike, the ability of workers to cripple the mechanisms of production. Strikes could be sustained with the support of political parties, strike funds, and union halls. Workers without these support mechanisms had to replicate the infrastructure of parties and unions if they wanted to put prolonged pressure on the bosses and the state. But now, with the decimation of the U.S. manufacturing base, along with the dismantling of our unions and authentic opposition parties, we will have to search for different instruments of rebellion. We will have to develop a revolutionary theory that is not reliant on industrial or agrarian muscle of workers. Most manufacturing jobs have disappeared, and of those that remain, few are unionized. Our family farms have been destroyed by agribusinesses. Monsanto and its Faustian counterparts on Wall Street rule. They are steadily poisoning our lives and rendering us powerless. The corporate leviathan, which is global, is freed from the constraints of a single nation state or government. Corporations are beyond regulation or control. Politicians are too anemic or more often too corrupt to stand in the way of the accelerating corporate destruction. This makes our struggle different from revolutionary struggles in industrial societies in the past. Our revolt will look more like what happened in the less industrialized Slavic republics, Russia, Spain, and China, and uprisings led by a disenfranchised rural and urban working class and peasantry in liberation movements that swept through Africa and Latin America. The dispossessed working poor, along with unemployed college graduates and students, unemployed journalists, lawyers, and teachers, along with impoverished artists, will form our movement. And this is why the fight for a higher minimum wage is crucial to uniting service workers with the alienated, college-educated sons and daughters of the declining middle class. Bakunin, unlike Marx, considered these déclassé intellectuals essential for successful revolt. It is not the poor who make revolution. It is those who conclude that they will not be able, as they once expected, to rise economically and socially. Service workers and fast food workers know they are trapped, as does the swelling population of college graduates caught in a vice of low-paying jobs and obscene amounts of debt. These two groups, once united, will be our primary engines of revolt. Much of the urban poor has been crippled, and in many cases broken, by a rewriting of laws, especially drug laws, that has permitted courts, probation officers, parole boards, and police to randomly seize poor people of color, especially African American men, without just cause, and lock them in cages for years. In many of our most impoverished urban centers, our internal colonies, as Malcolm X called them, mobilization will, at least at first, be difficult. The urban poor are in chains, and these chains are being readied for the rest of us. Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephen examined 100 years of violent and nonviolent resistant movements in their book, Why Civil Resistance Works. They concluded that nonviolent movements succeeded twice as often as violent uprisings. Violent movements work, they noted, primarily in civil wars or in ending foreign occupations. Nonviolent movements appeal to those within the power structure, especially the police and civil servants, who are cognizant of the corruption and decadence of the power elite and are willing in the end to abandon them. And we only need 1 to 5% of the population actively working for the overthrow of this system. Let me use that word overthrow again for the Homeland Security people in the room. We only need 1 to 5% of the population actively working for this overthrow to bring down even the most ruthless totalitarian structures. Rebellion works on 2 tracks, building alternative structures such as public banks to free ourselves from the control and tyranny of commercial banks, and finding mechanisms to halt the machine. The most important impediment facing us is no longer ideological, it is logistical. The security and surveillance state has made its highest priority the breaking of any infrastructure that might sustain widespread revolt. And that is why the Occupy encampments were shut down. The state knows the tinder is there. It knows that the continued unraveling of the economy and the effects of climate change make popular unrest inevitable. It knows that as unemployment and underemployment doom at least a quarter of the population, perhaps more, to perpetual poverty and misery, as unemployment benefits are scaled back, as schools close, as the middle class withers away, as pension funds are looted by hedge fund thieves, and as government continues to let the fossil fuel industry ravage the planet, the future will increasingly be one of open conflict. The battle against the corporate state right now is primarily about the building of an infrastructure to sustain resistance. The state, in its internal projections, has a vision of the future that is as dystopian as mine. But the state, to protect itself, uses the mechanisms of propaganda to assure us that we can continue to build a society based on limitless growth, profligate consumption, and a dependence on fossil fuel. This mania for hope is fed to us at the expense of the truth. The corporate state, meanwhile, is preparing internally for the world it knows is coming. It is cementing into place a pervasive police state, one that includes the complete evisceration of our most basic civil liberties and the militarization of the internal security apparatus, as well as the wholesale surveillance of the citizenry. Those with the moral courage to expose the security and surveillance apparatus, Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Jeremy Hammond, are criminalized and persecuted. We will be sustained in our revolt, which will require us to confront all systems of power by the transcendental. Chants, work songs, spirituals, the blues, poetry, dance, and art converged under slavery to nourish and sustain the imagination of African Americans. These were the forces that, as Ralph Ellison wrote, we had in place of freedom. The oppressed would be the first, for they often know their fate, to admit that perhaps on a rational level, such a notion is absurd. But they also know that it's only through the human imagination that they survive. Jewish inmates in Auschwitz, reportedly, put God on trial for the Holocaust and condemned God to death. This is a rational response to the horror of the Holocaust. And yet, when they were finished, a rabbi stood after the verdict to leave the prisoners in evening prayers. And it is this absurdity that we must capture. African Americans and Native Americans for centuries had little control over their destinies. Forces of bigotry and violence kept them violently subjugated by whites. Suffering for the oppressed was tangible. Death was a constant companion. And it was only their imagination, as William Faulkner noted at the end of The Sound and the Fury, that permitted them, unlike the novel's white Compson family, to endure. The theologian James Cone captures this in his book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Cone says that for oppressed blacks, the cross on which Jesus was crucified was a paradoxical religious symbol because it inverts the world's value system with the news that hope comes by way of defeat, that suffering and death do not have the last word, that the last shall be first and the first last. Cone continues that God could make a way out of no way, and Jesus' cross was truly absurd to the intellect, yet profoundly real in the souls of black folk. Enslaved blacks who first heard the gospel message seized on the power of the cross. Christ crucified manifests God's loving and liberating presence in the contradictions of black life. That transcendent presence in the lives of black Christians that empowered them to believe that ultimately in God's eschatological future, they would not be defeated by the troubles of the world, no matter how great and painful their suffering. Believing this paradox, this absurd claim of faith, was only possible in humility and repentance. There was no place for the proud and the mighty, for people who think that God called them to rule over others. The cross was God's critique of power, white power, with powerless love, snatching victory out of defeat. Reinhold Niebuhr labeled this capacity to defy forces of repression, even in the face of near certain defeat, a sublime madness in the soul. Niebuhr wrote that nothing but madness will do battle with the malignant power and spiritual wickedness in high places. This sublime madness, as Niebuhr understood, is vital. Without it, truth is obscured. And Niebuhr also knew that traditional liberalism was a useless force in moments of extremity. Liberalism, Niebuhr said, lacks the spirit of enthusiasm, not to say fanaticism, which is so necessary to move the world out of its beaten tracks. It is too intellectual and too little emotional to be an effective force in history. The prophets in the Hebrew Bible spoke out of this sublime madness. The words of the Hebrew prophets, as Abraham Heschel wrote, were a scream in the night. While the world is at ease and asleep, the prophet feels the blast from heaven. The prophet, because he or she saw and faced an unpleasant truth, was, Heschel said, compelled to proclaim the very opposite of what his or her heart expected. Rebellion is a moral imperative. It is to be carried out regardless of the possibilities of success. It is not for the practical or the timid. It is an act that is performed in the end because in times of despair and suffering, it affirms life. Primo Levi, in his memoir Survival in Auschwitz, tells of teaching Italian to another inmate, Jean Samuel, in exchange for lessons in French. Levi recites to Samuel from memory Canto 26 of Dante's The Inferno. It is the story of Ulysses' final voyage. We cheered, but soon that cheering turned to woe, for then a whirlwind born from the strange land battered our little vessel on the prow. 3 times the boat and all the sea were whirled, and at the 4th, to please another's will, the aft tipped in the air, the prow went down until the ocean closed above our bones. He has received the message, Levi wrote of his friend and what they shared in Dante. He has felt that it has to do with him, that it has to do with all men who toil, and with us in particular. Levi goes on, it is vitally necessary and urgent that he listen, that he understand before it is too late. Tomorrow he or I might be dead, or we might never see each other again. It is only those who find the courage to peer into the molten pit who can finally minister to the suffering of those around them. They will be infected with this sublime madness. As Hannah Arendt wrote in The Origins of Totalitarianism, the only morally reliable people are not those who say this is wrong or this should not be done, but those who say I can't. They know that as Immanuel Kant wrote, if justice perishes, human life on earth has lost its meaning. And this means that like Socrates, we must come to a place where it is better to suffer wrong than to do wrong, no matter what happens around us. We can surmount despair not by ignoring reality, but by responding radically to it. And this includes acts of civil disobedience, including jail time. In these acts, we become fully human. One of the most coherent philosophical positions is revolt. Camus wrote, it is a constant confrontation between man and his obscurity. It is not aspiration, for it is devoid of hope. That revolt is the certainty of a crushing fate without the resignation that ought to accompany it. Those we must follow now will be ornery and mad as all prophets. They will call us to lives of steadfast defiance. They will be burnt children. The people noticed that Crazy Horse was queerer than ever, Black Elk said in remembering the final days of the wars of Western expansion. He went on to say of the great Sioux warrior, he hardly ever stayed in the camp. People would find him out alone in the cold, and they would ask him to come home with them. He would not come, but sometimes he would tell the people what to do. People wondered if he ate anything at all. Once my father found him out alone like that, and he said to my father, "Uncle, you have noticed me the way I act, but do not worry. There are caves and holes for me to live in, and out here the spirits may help me. I am making plans for the good of my people." Homer, Dante, Beethoven, Melville, Dostoevsky, Proust, Joyce, Auden, Emily Dickinson, James Baldwin, along with the sculptor David Smith, the photographer Diane Arbus, the blues musician Charlie Patton, all had the sublime madness. It is the sublime madness that lets one sing as the bluesmen Isaman Bracey did in Hinds County, Mississippi. I've been down so long, Lord, down, don't worry me. And yet, in the midst of the imagination also lies the absurdity and certainty of divine justice. I feel my hell arisen every day. I feel my hell arisen every day. Someday it'll burst this levee and wash the whole world away. Shakespeare's greatest heroes and heroines, Prospero, Antony, Juliet, Viola, Rosalind, Hamlet, Cordelia, have this sublime madness. King Lear, once he was stripped of power, forced to live with the persecuted and the poor, obtained it. It was only then that he could see. It was only then that he understood that unbridled human lust and hubris led to the suicide of the species. It will come, Albany says in the play. Humanity must perforce prey on itself like monsters of the deep. The poems of Federico Garcia Lorca sustain the Republicans fighting the fascists in Spain. Music, dance, drama, art, song, painting were the fire and drive of all resistance movements. The rebel units in El Salvador, when I covered the war, always traveled with musicians and theater troupes. Art, as Emma Goldman pointed out, has the power to make ideas felt. Goldman noted that when Andrew Undershaft, a character in George Bernard Shaw's play Major Barbara, said poverty is the worst crime of all the other crimes are virtues beside it, his impassioned declaration elucidated the cruelty of class warfare more effectively than Shaw's socialist tracts. The degradation of education into vocational training for the corporate state, the destruction of the arts and journalism, the hijacking of these disciplines by corporate sponsors severs us from understanding, self-actualization, and finally transcendence. In aesthetic terms, the corporate state seeks to crush beauty, truth, and imagination, and this is the war waged by all totalitarian systems. The role of the artist, then, precisely is to illuminate that darkness, blaze roads through the vast forests, James Baldwin wrote, so that we will not, in all our doing, lose sight of its purpose, which is, after all, to make the world a more humane dwelling place.
All right, thanks for tuning in today, guys. Under the weather, so I will return next week. Stay tuned for Rock the Boat and Clint today, and Behind the Woodshed with Hal, all the other incredible programming here on the UCY.TV Broadcasting Network. Make it a great week.
There is only one holistic system of systems. I will MK Ultra ya, put the MK scope on ya. If the MK hits you, it's guaranteed to open ya. The 57mm Mark 20 rounds a minute trying to stop them. Don't put that on your wish list, that's retarded babble. Protesters make the hit list soon as they start to rabble. They are nothing but fishes in the barrel. It doesn't have to be Christmas for a carol. Some decorate with ornamental decorum. Some perform Shakanar on Hanukkah and Purim. That's where my job come in. I am a blessing to the mercenary for the corporation selling weapons to them. Any potential competitor step into them. I'm authorized to knock them out and stick a GPS into them. They want to sell uranium to Iran that's enriched. That's a bitch. Now they gotta teach us.